My name is Dottie Baumgarten, and I am an educator for the Philadelphia Water Department. I've been working with the Water Department since 2009, and I'm able to talk about topics with the public and with schools. I've done tours at the sewage treatment plant, the drinking water treatment plant, and I help teachers connect to some of the resources that the Water Department has so that you can use resources to educate your children, as well as talk to public groups at events or in these kind of talks. So I'm glad to be with you today. I'm glad you could be part of this presentation. Okay, we've covered what is a watershed, and we're going to move into how does water move across the land and what is combined sewer. So in a natural landscape as compared to an urban, highly developed landscape, the natural water cycle is going to be interrupted. There's going to be a significant difference about how the rain and the water that's coming from the sky, there's going to be a significant difference about how that moves through the land. In a natural environment where you have a lot of trees and a lot of nature and a lot of gardens, etc., when the rain is coming down, 25% of that rainwater goes into the top of the ground, shallow infiltration in the ground. 25% goes deep into the ground. 40% can evaporate from the greenery, and only 10% of the rainwater becomes runoff. Look at the city side, where you have a highly developed landscape with non-porous surfaces and very little nature. Only about 10% of the water goes into shallow infiltration, 5% goes into deep infiltration, only 30% evaporates because you don't have the high amount of surfaces that can evaporate water off of the leaves. So you end up with 55% of the rainwater becoming runoff. So think about that. 10% is runoff in nature areas, and with the same amount of rain, 55% of the rain becomes runoff in developed areas. So you're going to have a lot more flooding, you're going to have a lot more of erosion, you're going to have a lot more of pollutants being carried to the river. One of the things that, another way of thinking about this is that when you have a river in an urban area, the river can be described as flashy. It can become very high very quickly, and it can become very low very quickly. And when you don't have a rainstorm, you may have almost no water in that creek. And when you have a rainstorm, it's overflowing and causing a lot of problems. We want to reduce that. We want to help nature, help the cities become more like nature so that the water can stay put. Also, in the urban areas, the runoff is going to the sewer pipes. Okay, so let's talk about combined sewers and separate sewers. As the city of Philadelphia was developed, well, let's think about history. Way back in history, when you first have Europeans coming to the Philadelphia area, you might have one family living on 100 acres of property, and the land can manage the sewage that the family would produce. When you have a family living on 1 acre of property, and you have an outhouse and you have a well in that same area, the land may not be able to manage correcting and accommodating the sewage. Fast forward to when in Philadelphia we have 14 feet wide row houses right beside each other. You end up with an outhouse right beside a well in the backyard, and you've got contamination in that well. What do you need to do? So what was happening at that period of time is that as the land was becoming developed, when the water was being sent to the rivers, to the creeks then became open sewers. People were sending their sewage to the creeks because you weren't thinking about who was miles downriver from you. You weren't walking that far, maybe a mile you were, but not much farther than that. So you weren't thinking about who was downriver from you. You were only thinking about getting the sewage away from you. So you would send the sewage to the rivers. So then the creeks became highly polluted. So then our ancestors decided, let's close those creeks up so that kids aren't playing in those creeks. So those creeks that became the sewer pipes are the previous forebears, I think is where I went, to our current day sewers. So when that was happening, the rainwater and the sewage from the homes were going into the same pipe. That now is called a combined sewer. So right now you have Mill Creek, which is all underground. You have the Wissahickon Creek, that's all underground. You have the Little Tacony, which is all underground. All of those used to be creeks in the city, and they now are only, for the most part, underground in sewer pipes. So in that situation, in the combined sewer, what you have is on dry weather, you have the sewage from your home going into a large sewer and stormwater pipe that's under the streets. Notice that the storm drain is going right into that same pipe, and notice that your downspout is going right into that same pipe. Notice that the dam is a barrier in the pipe, but right now there's no liquid at the level of the dam. And notice that the sewage is all making its way to the treatment plant. And there's an outfall pipe to the creek right there, but it is not being used at this point. On dry weather, in a separate sewer area, the pipes are set up, the stormwater pipes are set up so that your storm drains and the downspout from your house all go into one pipe that takes any liquid that's going to go to the creek, and the sewage from your home in the separate sewer side, all the sewage is going into your sewage pipe, and it's going to the wastewater treatment plants. So this is dry weather. So in wet weather, the water is going to behave differently in those two different situations. Let's first look at the separate sewer side. In wet weather, it's not a problem. Your water from your downspout, your storm drain water is all going to the one pipe, it's going to the river. Yes, there's going to be pollution from the street that goes to the river, but it is not being combined with your sewage from your home. Look at the combined sewer side. In wet weather, what's going to happen is the rain from your roof is going to go to the same pipe that the sewage from your house is in, and the rain from your street is going into that same pipe. And there's too much volume of water. It fills up the capacity, it fills up the space of that pipe. You have to have the ability for that mixed water to go to the creek, because if you don't have this outfall, you're going to have sewage in your basement, or you're going to have sewage and flooding in the street, and we can't have that. The majority of the sewage is still going to the sewage treatment plant, but some of the human waste is going to the river. This is called combined sewer outfall, CSO. And when we have a ½ inch of rain somewhere in the city, you can be sure that some of the sewage is going to the river. So this is a problem that we want to correct. By the way, in the storm drains in Philadelphia, even though in dry weather, any dribbles from your street is going to get into the sewage pipe and will go to the sewage treatment plant, you still need to treat all of our storm drains in Philadelphia as if it's going to the river, because any dribbles that get into the storm drain on dry day still can be washed to the river on wet days. So the impact of stormwater in Philadelphia. I want to say a little bit about the traditional ways of managing stormwater. The traditional ways would be to pipe the water and to send it to the rivers if it's stormwater, or to, if it's combined sewer, you have that outfall to the river. So this is some of the negative impacts of stormwater runoff. you have flooding, you have pollution, you have degraded steam banks, you have scouring of the bottom of the streams. Our rivers and our creeks can look horrible because of the massive amount of stormwater that comes into our creeks during a storm. There's riverine flooding. This is what a combined sewer overflow looks like. Some of them you can drive trucks into. You have erosion and sediment transport. All of these are problems that degrade our environment and degrade our rivers. And since we're getting our drinking water from the rivers, it's degrading the source of our drinking water. So the next topic is going to be green stormwater infrastructure. Because of the fact that some of our combined sewers overflow to the river and some of our sewage from homes get to the river, we're under mandate that we need to reduce that amount of sewage getting into the river. So what the city of Philadelphia is doing is we are managing our stormwater in a way that helps the rain soak into the ground where the rain lands. And these technologies are called green stormwater infrastructure. This problem of combined sewage getting into the river is not unique to Philadelphia. New York City has that problem, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Lancaster, Chester, all of the older cities in the East Coast have that same problem. Some of the other cities are building bigger basins underground in order to manage to hold the stormwater when you have a rainstorm. We are in the forefront of developing green stormwater infrastructure so that what we are doing is we are helping the rain to stay put when the rain is coming into on our land. I'm just briefly going to be talking about green stormwater infrastructure. There are a lot of resources out there that expand on this a lot more. So the old approach is to contain and pipe, and the new approach is to manage the rain where it lands. We want to slow the flow. We want to help it infiltrate into the ground. We want to use it if we can, and we want to allow the rainwater to evaporate. So whether it is a green roof or whether it is a wetland or whether it is rain barrels, there are very many ways of holding the water back or reusing the water or allowing it to sit. By the way, the whole purpose of this is to slow the flow just for 24 hours. Because since the rivers and since the rivers are flashy, you can apply that also to the pipes and the way the water's flowing. When you have a rainstorm, the capacity of the pipe is exceeded. And if you can slow the flow down so that instead of having a heightened amount of water getting into the pipe all at the same time, you can flatten the curve and you can make sure that the water is less at the peak of flow, and 24 hours later, that water can get into the pipe and there's space in the pipe and the water can flow to the sewage treatment plant and be cleaned. Here are some other examples of green stormwater infrastructure. You can get a free rain barrel if you are a homeowner in Philadelphia. There are some ways that businesses can be reimbursed for some of the ways they manage their stormwater on their property. Homeowners don't have that, that program at this point. But homeowners do have the program through the rain check program that if you are putting some green stormwater infrastructure in your house, you may be able to qualify for a grant that helps you do that. Let's move on to topics that are specific to the Wissahickon Creek. Fairmont Park was created in order to protect the health of the rivers. In the mid-1800s, when they were making the decision of where we're going to get our drinking water, it was understood that by using the rivers, we wanted to protect the quality of water in the river. At that time, you had homes and you had industry right along all the riverbanks. And industry was putting their pollution into the river. For example, a tannery would be getting animals, would be getting the skins and using the skins in the way they wanted to use them. And they would throw the dead animal into the river. And there was a tannery that was right above where Fairmont Waterworks was getting some of its water out of the Schuylkill River. So Fairmont Park was created in order to protect the land, in order to protect the river. And that's the beginning of Fairmont Park. Another topic for the Wissahickon Creek is Carpenter's Woods. This is really an interesting story, I think. When Mount Airy was being developed, and this was true all across Philadelphia and probably the suburbs at that point too, developers wanted to be building on flat land. And so if you get a chance, take the tour of the Wissahickon Creek, which Adam Levine and Drew Brown lead, because they follow the Wissahickon Creek and you can see the different things that are happening in the Tacony Frankford watershed. But what's happening in Mount Airy and Chestnut Hill is that the same kind of development was going on. The developers wanted to have flat land. So they were taking land that looked like Carpenter's Woods with higher ground and lower ground, and they were flattening it all out so that you could build on flat land. They were digging down the hills and filling in the valleys. The Carpenters, they decided that they were donating their land to the city of Philadelphia. And by doing that, and I don't know the history of it, I don't know why they were donating it to Philadelphia, but when they were donating it to Philadelphia, they put in the stipulation that the land could not be flattened. And so what you have in Mount Airy right now is you have a section of the city, Carpenter's Woods, that shows you the original lay of the land in that area. And right beside Carpenter's Woods, you have flattened land that demonstrates what the developers were doing. They were flattening the land in order to build houses on there. So it's really an interesting thing to think about. It's a little piece of history in your backyard. One of the things to be aware of is that when people are walking their dogs in Carpenter's Woods, they still should pick up the dog waste, because what's happening is you have so many dogs that are walking in Carpenter's Woods, and people are thinking it's fertilizer, but the rain is carrying that dog waste to the Wissahickon Creek, and that area of the Wissahickon Creek is testing more polluted because of the dog waste that's coming from Carpenter's Woods. So when you're in Carpenter's Woods, if you're walking with your dog, please still pick up the dog waste. Saylor Grove is another unique area for the Wissahickon Creek. It's one of the places in Philadelphia that the city of Philadelphia and the water department installed some green stormwater infrastructure. They installed it quite early. I think it was 2006, I'm not certain. But Saylor Grove was one of the first areas where the water department looked at using green stormwater infrastructure to improve the quality of the creek. That area of land, which is right by Rittenhouse Street and Lincoln Drive and Wissahickon Creek, Wissahickon Avenue, that triangular area was lawn in the 1980s, and it was really kind of like an abandoned park. Maybe some people were hanging out there, but it really wasn't a desirable place to be. And what was happening there is that, and it's still happening there, it's designed to, the way it is established is that you have pipes from Germantown area that are bringing water from the street into that area of land. And that is happening because, Germantown is at higher ground than Saylor Grove, and the water is going to come through Saylor Grove, and it's going to go to the Monashone Creek, and it's going to go down to the Wissahickon Creek. That's just the way the land is. So at that time in the 1980s, they were very aware that you've got a flood of water coming off of Germantown proper, and it was coming down into Montashone in a rainstorm. It was very flashy. The water was running through Saylor Grove. It was hitting Montashone Creek, and it was carrying a lot of pollution load, and it was doing a lot of erosion. So they developed this program. They developed this green stormwater infrastructure that has 3 tiers of wetland. So what's happening in that first tier is the water's coming off of Germantown. It's coming into that first little wetland, and it's slowing down. And then it's spilling over into the second wetland, and then it's spilling over into the third wetland. And so now what you're doing by this green stormwater infrastructure is you are slowing the flow of the water. You are giving a little bit of time for the nutrient load and the pollution load to settle into those wetlands. You're giving time for some of the plants to consume some of that nutrient load, and you're reducing the problems for the Montashone Creek. It's effective. It has slowed the pollution load in the Montashone Creek, and it has slowed the erosion. And it has created this beautiful natural area where you can see green herons and frogs and a lot of wonderful nature. And people are going there, even on a rainy day with a umbrella, people are going to Saylor Grove in order to enjoy nature there. Center in the Park by Vernon Park has a group of seniors, senior environmental group, who are testing the water at Saylor Grove and Montashone Creek on a regular basis. At one point, they had a program with one of the local schools. I'm not sure if that's still going right now, but they're actually coordinated with Chestnut Hill College. I know there's a connection there for the Center in the Park seniors. So they're accurately testing the water both in Saylor Grove and in Montashone Creek in order to give information back to the scientists and the professionals who are evaluating the effectiveness of this green stormwater infrastructure. Another place in the Wissahickon Creek that's really exciting is the Rittenhouse Town. There's a Friends of Rittenhouse Town organization. This was the location where there were the first paper mills in the United States. This is also connected to the Quaker and Mennonite community in Germantown that first settled Germantown area with 6 Quaker families and 6 Mennonite families. So Rittenhouse Town is an area, at one point that area had maybe 50 mills along the Montashone Creek, but also the Wissahickon Creek. They had everything that was the beginning of life in the United States for Europeans here in the United States, in the colonies. So you can see a bit of history there. They have paper making going on. This building that you're seeing was built in 1707, I believe. And you can get tours with Rittenhouse Town. They have events at different times. It's a beautiful area to walk through with a little bit of history. And you can, I think you can see the foundation for one of the mills that was there. So at that time in history, Rittenhouse Town was a town of its own. Germantown was a town of its own. Philadelphia was a town of its own. The reason why you could have paper printing presses in Philadelphia is because you had paper being made by the Rittenhouse family in Wissahickon Creek. One of the things to think about when you're taking hikes in the Wissahickon Creek, you see some of this structure and you're like, what is this? So back in history, when you had development happening along both sides of the Schuylkill River, what you had was the sewage being piped to the river. You wanted to get the sewage away from your homes. When they recognized that they wanted it, when they recognized that it was going, when they started the sewage piping, they ended up taking the sewage from the homes and just sending it right to the rivers. So you had sewage coming right to the Wissahickon Creek from the Roxborough side of the Wissahickon Creek and from the Mount Airy Chestnut Hill side of the Wissahickon Creek. When they started using the water from the Schuylkill River, they recognized that they needed to not have this sewage going to the creeks. And so what they ended up doing was they ended up putting in interceptor sewer lines that caught the sewage coming from the homes and the businesses and directed the sewage by pipe lower down in the Schuylkill River. I believe the original plan was to get the sewage below the Fairmont Waterworks, because Fairmont Waterworks was where they were getting the drinking water, and they wanted to get the heavy load of sewage away from Fairmont, from the waterworks, and so they were piping it to below where Fairmont Waterworks was taking water from the Schuylkill River. On the Mount Airy side, what you see is the high line of the interceptor sewers, and when you're going for a hike and walking on that sometime, you're walking on this pipe, which is protecting the Wissahickon Creek from the load of sewage from people living in their homes. And when you're on the Roxborough side, the sewer line is pretty much underneath Forbidden Drive. So on one hand, ooh, yuck, you've got sewer pipes right there. On the other hand, this is hardscape. This is the piping that is effectively protecting the Wissahickon Creek from the load of sewage in this heavy populated area of the world. It's being quite effective.